Hello, welcome everyone to our first European Life After Stroke Forum event of 2022. I'm Heraclea or Harriet Proyos, the president of the Stroke Alliance for Europe. We advocate for improvements in stroke care and support across the whole stroke care pathway. And as a membership organization representing stroke support organizations from across Europe, we would like to take a few moments to reflect on the terrible events happening in Ukraine. Our thoughts are with our colleagues, friends, stroke survivors, their families, and carers in all areas affected by this war. We do not condone any activity that negatively affects the welfare and well-being of people with stroke and the wider stroke community, as well as all civilians in Ukraine. We remain focused and united with our partners, and we hope for a swift resolution to this war. Getting back to the purpose of our event today, few opportunities exist regarding conferences, workshops, and shared networking events for advocates, researchers in life after stroke, which is a neglected but vital area of care that should be on advanced platforms everywhere. To address this issue, we launched the European Life After Stroke Forum event in 2019. The aim is to create an opportunity for researchers, scientists, medical professionals, healthcare policymakers, support organizations, stroke survivors, and their carers to come together. We convened the European Life After Stroke Forum Scientific Committee, many of whom participated in the first steering committee meeting for the implementation of the Stroke Action Plan for Europe to curate these important events. I would like to introduce you to the chair of the European Life After Stroke Scientific Committee and also the chair of this morning's plenary session, Professor Avril Drummond. She's been instrumental in making this event a success. Hi, Avril. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for being our chair this morning. I would like to start off by asking you a question. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Why is life after stroke so important?
So thank you for inviting me, Harriet. So why is life after stroke important? Well, we are really ecstatic that finally we have this included within the Stroke Action Plan for Europe, and that's really important. But of course, we really recognise that there is a lot of work still to do here, and this frankly has been a really neglected area. And in fact, this sentiment has really been echoed in a recent Life After Stroke chat that we had when people were saying things like, it is really heartbreaking that people are really abandoned after they finish their therapy and rehabilitation. And people also really felt that priorities and solutions really had to involve stroke patients. And that, of course, is what we're trying to do here. The stroke patient, the stroke participant, and their carers and families are very much part of what we're doing in this series of events, and it's the heart of what we do. Thank you, Harriet.
Thank you.
Okay, so with great pleasure, I would like to open this morning's plenary. And we have two plenary sessions this morning. The first will focus on self-management, and the second will be on communication after stroke. So you get a break and you get some lunch in between. I would also just underline to you that these events are accredited. So if you attend both, you get 3 European points for your portfolio. So I would like to start by just saying very quickly a number of thank yous. I'd like to thank in advance the speakers for this morning's session. I would like to thank our sponsors who have very generously underwritten this event, which is why it's free. I'd like to thank our partners who have promoted this event. And I'd like to thank, of course, the scientific committee who have brought the programme together, and for SAFE who have made the event happen. So, self-management. Self-management after stroke works best when it's tailored to the needs of the stroke survivor and their families. And this morning, we're going to look at new ways of thinking about self-management and really thinking about how we build the evidence base around this area. And we really hope that this session will inspire and challenge you. But one of the things that we will be discussing is the fact that the term self-management means different things to different people.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for coming. My name's Scott, and I'm a stroke survivor. In 2007, a year after graduating as a physiotherapist, I suffered a major stroke, which caused me to lose my vision and left me with some pretty significant physical impairments, which I still live with to this day. From 2007 to 2012, I spent time in inpatient rehab settings and community services, which helped me to rebuild my life to where I am today. From 2012 to now, I have worked in different settings which have allowed me to regain my life. In 2016, I started a family and they've been a huge support for me. So this morning, I would really like to focus on what self-management means to me as a patient. Something that's been really important to me along my journey is that my clinicians have really allowed me to be a member of the multidisciplinary team. So my clinicians have all got their expertise in various different things, but I also have expertise in what is best for me, or what I consider is best for me. I have expertise in what I enjoy, what I don't enjoy, but also what things I've tried in the past, what things have worked well for me in the past, what things haven't worked well. And I've always encouraged my clinicians to really help me sit at the table with them to help problem solve the issues that I've got and really bring those things to that table. Rather than my clinicians saying to me, Scott, this is how you need to try something, they've really brought me to the table and said, Scott, what do you think is going to work, and how can we support you in achieving those things, which has been really important to me. Something else that's been really important for me is that I've always been allowed to have really ambitious goals, and my clinicians have never turned around to me and said that those things have been unrealistic. So I'm somebody who is really prone to setting quite big, quite outlandish goals. And yeah, many people might say that those are unrealistic. What I've really valued in the clinicians that I have had is they've said, okay, that's great, but what might you need to do as that first step on the road to achieving that big goal? And that's been really important to me, because nobody's ever turned around to me and said, that's unrealistic, you need to choose something else. What they've always done is they've said, okay, yeah, that's a great thing, but what is that first step that you need to take? That's always been super important to me, because it's not quash my kind of hopes and dreams really on that road. And the final thing that I found really important is that I've always been allowed to take risks. I've learned so much from taking risks, and sometimes those risks have paid off, but sometimes they haven't. But I've always learned lots from the risks that I've taken. And I know a lot of clinicians feel quite uncomfortable from their patients taking risks. But unfortunately for you as clinicians, we as patients are going to take risks, whether you like it or not. And I think for me, what's been really helpful is that the clinicians that I've worked with have recognized that in me is that I'm going to take the risks whether they're there or not. And actually what they've seen is that they would rather that I take the risks with them there in a slightly more controlled environment, and allow me to build that insight, rather than me take the risks with them not there. So that's been something that I've really valued from them. So yeah, those are just some of the things that those are some of kind of my views on self-management and some of my thoughts. I hope you have a really good morning, and I'll see you all later on for the Q&A.
Good morning. My name is Fiona Jones and I'm really thrilled to start off our first session on the first ever European Life After Stroke conference. This is all about self-management support, and my session together with the other two sessions, we're going to be covering lots of different areas. But we're really going to be thinking about what makes successful self-management support, and we're going to be hearing from practitioners and from patients and having an understanding hopefully of some of the evidence and theory that could help us. So this is what I'm going to attempt to cover. It's quite a lot, but essentially I want to get that sense of how to integrate and sustain this way of working, not only as a practitioner working in a stroke service, but also right the way through a team and through a pathway. Starting with a quote, this is from somebody that had a stroke in the pandemic. She said, "I thought of it like a journey by car. You have everything planned and all of a sudden the car grinds to a halt. You check the car, but everything just seems to be going wrong and you end up wondering what's going on here." And I think it's always a really important reminder to us about the level of uncertainty and the difficulties that people have in terms of being able to think about what the future may be like for them after their stroke. So any approach to self-management support, and I know the other speakers will agree with me, needs to start with the person and what they're like. And if we think about the evidence base around the impact that stroke has on people, again, we've really reached saturation in terms of the qualitative evidence. We now know that stroke has a really devastating effect on self-image, and also people's information needs and other needs are different. They're not only different depending on each individual, but they're different right across the recovery trajectory, whatever that may look like. The biggest impact that we know of is the psychological and emotional impact and the level of support that's needed by people and their families. So when we look at these studies, these can really help us inform self-management programs. And the self-management program that I'm going to talk to you about this morning, Bridges, has been really informed by this sort of qualitative research. It's important to think about rehabilitation and self-management, and I think if we just focus on rehabilitation being about independence, then we're also thinking self-management is just about somebody being independent again, but it's not. It's really about how somebody finds meaning, autonomy, and that sense of social engagement. And actually those are the really critical things for independence anyway. So again, coming back to understanding the person, what they were like, their story, their skills, their experiences, that's a key part of any self-management program. We know that there's a problem with the word self-management. It can feel lonely, isolating. And when we ask people with stroke what it feels like, it just feels like, well, I've just got to get on with it the way I did before. It's surviving, doing the best I can. But again, that's really not what we want to put across this morning. We don't want self-management to feel like it's isolating and the responsibility is all on the individual. In fact, an important part of Bridges is the responsibility is on the clinicians and it's on the teams to create the situation where self-management confidence can thrive. There's also some good evidence building though, and self-management programs have been shown to improve quality of life. So actually there's good evidence, but what does that evidence really tell us? What does a program need to contain in order to achieve that impact? We look at the evidence from other long-term conditions. You know, self-management support can really lead to significant improvements in people's knowledge and confidence, their health behaviours and outcomes, their experiences of care, which is not to be underestimated, because if somebody feels like they're supported and they're actually working with practitioners that are really open and supportive, then that can also have an impact on outcomes. But we need to understand what the secret ingredient is. And there is a lot of evidence that the most successful programs are based on a theory called social cognitive theory. And social cognitive theory was developed by Albert Bandura, who sadly died a couple of years ago. But really his legacy was really to help us to understand why and how people behave in the way that they do, but also to think about how we can influence that behaviour. And he introduced this construct of self-efficacy, which I know many of you will be familiar with, but it's that confidence and belief in your own capability. And we know that within the stroke literature, that can be very strongly associated with mobility, activities of daily living, and quality of life. But importantly, negatively associated with things like depression and self-esteem. So if your self-efficacy goes up, so does your self-esteem and your mood. And we know that in order for people to be confident to self-manage, they have to have a feeling of their own confidence and belief. So this is all just working together to try and think about what are those ties that come together to really influence successful self-management support. So we need a theory, and we have lots of theories in rehabilitation. This is just one. In self-management support, we've got some emerging theories, and one of which is this social cognitive theory as being really critical. Self-efficacy, which is an important part of that, is critical to the success of self-management. I know I feel as if I'm rushing through this, but I want to get to the short films that I want to show you. But Bridges, which I've mentioned before, we do lots and lots of training and research, and we do co-design projects right across stroke and other areas of healthcare. Essentially, our start point is about facilitating and supporting clinicians to change their behaviour so that they get to the heart of what's important to people straight away, early in the process, and they use every single interaction to support people's confidence, skills and knowledge to self-manage. And what's important about clinicians working in this way is that they really realise the value of sharing expertise. It builds capacity. A person with stroke has a great deal of knowledge, skills anyway prior to having their stroke. As a stroke professional, we build expertise in the area. If we combine those forces, we can really build capacity. And we've worked right across lots of different healthcare settings in the EU, in the UK and other countries. So it's really about using every single interaction. And it's about creating the feelings of success. I'd say there's a lot to Bridges, but this is our most important aspect. How can we create the space within those interactions so that people get that sense of success? Not a feeling of success that they could have only achieved something with the skill of a practitioner, but the feeling of success in their own capability. And we do that by really focusing on those past skills and experiences and on assets of people, not only their deficits and what's wrong. What does it feel like? And this was a randomised controlled trial that we did where we randomised stroke teams to either work in this way using Bridges or not. And then we interviewed people that had rehabilitation from Bridges practitioners. And these were just some of the things that they said. So there was a difference in the language used by practitioners. The very first session was, what do you hope to achieve? She asked me, what do I want to get out of therapy? As I was saying to the physiotherapist the other day, when are you lot off? And she said, when you don't feel like you don't need us anymore. And that's actually a really great outcome from rehabilitation. When the patient is saying to the rehab team, I'm okay, when are you lot off? And then finally, this is somebody that was asked, what would it feel like if you hit a problem after you've been discharged from rehabilitation? And they said, I would see it as a challenge. If I feel something as a challenge, I'll try and see if I can overcome that problem. So it's really creating a situation, a context where people start to feel really resourceful and confident in their own abilities. And if we give people the answers all the time and we give people the solutions, then that isn't going to happen necessarily. So I'd just like to say thanks to Paula Otter, who she leads a team in Leicestershire in the UK that has integrated bridges right the way through their stroke pathway. And she's talking about her experiences.
I went out and did an access visit to look at the home situation because he had a very small room in which he needed to complete some transfers in. And when I went out and looked at the space, I could see it was quite complicated. But we came back and set up that process. So we simulated how the bed was set up at home and how things. So I have to say that probably before Bridges, I would have been a little bit guilty of saying, okay, so here's what I think you should do, and let's try these things. But I actually stepped back and set the situation up and said, let's have a look. What do you think? What do you think might work? How might you go about this? And he tried some different techniques that he led with and we supported. The one that he chose wasn't very pretty, probably wasn't what I would have chosen as a therapist, but it actually worked for him. And he felt really good about the process. He felt confident that he could do it at home. And, you know, he felt that, you know, he'd made that decision. Therefore, the likelihood of him using that technique at home was, you know, really high because it's something that he'd generated himself.
And I just think it's useful to listen to how Paula is reflecting on how she would have given the answers and the solutions previously. But in this case, she stepped back and then he gained that confidence. I think it's also about asking questions in a different way and really exploring what success means to people. And this is, I'm going to introduce you to Arnott and Deanne now, who Arnott had a stroke. Again, right in the pandemic, and he has aphasia, and he's talking about what success really means to him. There's a bit of me talking as well, but hopefully you'll get the sense of what is his success.
So just to summarise the things that you've told me about, Arnott, it's about just a natural way of trying to set yourself these small targets, and also, like we've talked about before, also acknowledging your successes as well, you know, the stuff that you've done. And then also the sort of having that outlet, you know, your sort of creative outlet through the art. Could you say a little bit more about that? How do you feel? Why are you smiling?
Well, I didn't win anything in the competition I competed. I put 5 points in it. And they didn't give me anything.
Really?
5 out of 16,000 apologies.
But how does it make you feel when you're immersed in that? How does it happen?
I feel actually very proud because I enjoy portraits, and if somebody says, "That looks like him,"
that's a success.
Okay, so it's really about asking those questions, using the language, exploring what success looks like to people that can then start to help somebody believe in their own capability. And our successes in rehabilitation may not be the successes that are meaningful to people, as in the case with Arnott. It was just about the pride that he felt when somebody looked at a portrait he painted and they could recognise who it was. So how do you get an approach like this working right the way through a system? And it really has to be a sort of multiply staged approach. Lots of different ways of training, of awareness raising, staged work, evaluating, disseminating. So there's lots and lots of different ways that we have done this with Bridges. We've worked right across Wales, throughout all the stroke services in Wales, and we've also worked right across the east of England, and this was a large project that was evaluated by Dr. Nicola Hancock, University of East Anglia, which included 550 practitioners. Now, we are interested in what happens to the practitioners or the clinicians here. How confident do they feel that they can work in this way all the time? Not only when they feel as if they've got the time, we really want to focus on how they integrate it so it becomes a way of working. So, what's the scope to initiate self-management support in the acute setting? Well, this is somebody that says, I think everything's very prescriptive in the hospital. People do this, do that, your meal comes to you, but there's no choice in things that they do. So I think we, on a cognitive level, you know, patients aren't thinking for themselves. Everything's done to you. So in the acute setting, it's actually really critical that people also at that stage get the opportunity to put their own ideas across, work in partnership and in collaboration. And that's where we've worked with Bridges as well, is in the acute settings. It's also interesting when practitioners say, well, I thought I was working in this way, now I see that it's different. And this is Joan, who said it's not just allowing them time to wash themselves, it's basically putting the ball in their court for them to choose what goals they want to do, supporting them more than dictating to them. So I'd probably say the challenges I faced prior was a lack of understanding as to what self-management truly was. Since then, I don't see any challenges. I'm much more aware. It's opened my eyes. And then finally, one of the things that we know about with doing this work over a number of years is that something will be sustained if the practitioners enjoy it and like working in this way. And this is somebody, Tash from Wales again, that says, you know, sometimes you do feel under pressure that you have to give a yes or no to a patient or a professional or a consultant. And it did feel like it gave us permission to be a bit more pragmatic and more open-ended, because of course people do sometimes end up surprising you and going back to activities that you didn't think they would be capable of. So it's actually, you know, just recognizing that this way of working can also feel more satisfying as a practitioner as well. This is just a really great piece of research, or a piece of research, it's a large project that was done in New Zealand that looked at, actually you don't need to think about the amount of self-management support. It's not all about dose. One single session can lead to a critical impact on health-related quality of life and independence, because it focused specifically on the autonomy, the purpose to people's lives, their mastery, their success again, as we've talked about, and how they're going to find their connectedness, their social connections. So it's not just about we've got to do, you know, 6 sessions and then it won't work. Actually, change can take place within 1 session. So we're doing some projects in Europe, and at the moment we're working with Professor Elf from Dalarna University and others, and we're looking at whether we can take Bridges and we can transplant it in Sweden in stroke services there. And we're trying to understand what it actually takes to make it work there as well. And that's a project that is, we're about halfway through, and a really interesting project. So I thought I'd just end with some thoughts from a really fantastic Estonian rehab team that have been working in this way. And I asked them for a quote that really summed up what they felt about working in a Bridges way. Now, I'm not going to attempt the Estonian, but essentially the translation says, it's not me giving the direction for therapy, but it's the patient that does this, and I support them. This is what has changed. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference, and I look forward to your questions at the end. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Hanna Pallesen. I'm a senior researcher and a leader of a self-management research project for elderly stroke survivors in Denmark. I'm here with Mette Randi, an occupational therapist at Aarhus Neurocenter in the city of Aarhus. We are happy to be able to present the intervention, the project Stroke 65 Plus Continued Active Life, which focus on how the intervention was experienced by the elderly stroke survivors and their caregivers. I will present the findings of our quality studies, and Mette will exemplify and elaborate on the thinking and the organization of the approach. The intervention stroke 65 plus focus on self-management support delivered by 2 health professionals. We call them in the study mentors. They are a physiotherapist and an occupational therapist working in a municipal neuro-rehabilitation center. They were assigned in this intervention because of their specialized experience with neuro-rehab, their experience and interpersonal relationship formation, their communication skills, and their ability to manage conflict.
So, let me explain how the intervention differs from usual practice. Commonly, stroke survivors will be discharged to their own house after time at the new rehabilitation center. From there, the municipal rehabilitation takes over. In this project, we visited stroke survivors at the rehab center before they were discharged. Municipal rehabilitation was supplemented with a facilitating support. In what way? Well, you will hear further on. In this project, we also had the possibility to conduct support meetings after municipal rehabilitation for up to 9 months after discharge.
This presentation is based on 2 quality studies. First, we conducted a feasibility study from March to December 2017, then an RCT study. At the end of the RCT study, we conducted an evaluation study from March to October 2021. In the first feasibility study, we identified 6 social psychological mechanisms related to the mentor's focus area while interacting with the stroke survivors and the caregivers. And mechanism is here understood as a psychological factor that influences someone's behavior. The 6 mechanisms seem to be the foundation for the interaction processes between the mentors, the stroke survivor, and informal caregivers. We will now discuss the mechanism and the process identified as important in the intervention. The first identified mechanism was that a tailored approach. The elder stroke survivors and their informal caregivers experienced good coherence in the rehabilitation process, and none of them felt they had experienced a gap in the transition from hospital to municipal rehabilitation. Furthermore, the stroke patients and the informal caregivers stated that the rehabilitation process was adjusted to their individual needs and preferences, just like the mentor intended to do.
So, which methods did we use to conduct a tailored approach in our work? We used the COPM, the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure. In our work, we widened the focus to include meaningful occupation and activities in people's life. For example, at the first meeting, we always asked, what gave you a twinkle in your eye before you became ill? And what gives you a twinkle now? That's a good way to identify occupations. We also had a list of important issues so that people could indicate what their home, closest family, physical activity, friends, job, and hobbies meant to them. This gave us a good perception of what was important to people and what motivated them.
The next mechanism identified was develop a good relationship. Stroke survivors and the informal caregivers all described collaboration with the mentors as positive. They emphasized the mentor's personality characteristics as being authentic, empathic, having flair, attentive listening skills, being thoroughly and consistently following up on agreement and encouragement. These qualities were important for the elder stroke survivors and the informal caregivers because it gave them trust and made them want to work together with the mentors. A quote from Mia, 72 years of age, "It's simply easy to talk with the mentors who understands you and know what it's all about." The elder and the informal caregivers also emphasize the mentors' neurological knowledge and their experience with the stroke rehabilitation as very important. Mette will now share with us how the mentors sought to develop a good relationship.
We believe that the most effective tool to develop a good relationship is using an inductive approach, always beginning by asking the individual with stroke, what's on your mind? What do you want to work with today? In this way, we gave them opportunity to show some initiative and share responsibility, which invites self-management. We want to follow what the stroke survivors want and wishes, but at the same time, we also must be prepared to lead if necessary. Another useful method is being as authentic as you can, always being yourself in your professional role. We focused on the life goal of the elderly with stroke, but at the same time, we were aware of our role as part of the healthcare system with its established frameworks and limitations. But it's important to remember that frames also can be flexible, and we know the possibilities of our city very well.
In close relation to the development of good relationships, the mechanism dialogue-based communication came out as very fundamental. Stroke survivors and their caregivers stated that communication had to be positive and based on dialogue. They described that they were well involved in decision-making for the course of rehabilitation. They received psychological support and felt supported to increase their self-efficacy. A quote from a relative, "Kurt, my husband, is often the one to reject when something hurts or seems problematic." And there, the mentors could be the one to keep on going, so we both got the possibility to express ourselves.
In the communication, we sought always to ask open and reflective questions. As a health professional, it's important to ask a lot of questions rather than making your own stories. We intended to be curious and explorative. Often, stroke survivors will respond to our questions with important and unexpected information. So we really often get surprised. Another effective tool is just to be silent and listen to people. Frequently, something important will come up. Maybe, often the inner thoughts of people will arise if we just wait a little. Also be prepared to meet feelings with feelings, following the affective track, and be accepting of difficult things. Many stroke survivors have a lot going on in their minds, which can be difficult to deal with. So it helps to validate their feelings, and we can do so if we meet them with an effective answer.
Moving on to the next mechanism, involvement of relatives and social network. A fundamental condition in the intervention that differs from that of normal practice is that a stroke survivor and their informal caregivers are considered both as a duadic unit and as two individuals in the rehabilitation course. The informal caregivers expressed that it was beneficial for them to be involved in the rehabilitation process. For instance, a daughter stated, "Being involved in the process is important, to get the right picture of what my father has been through and to be able to support him." The former caregivers described themselves as co-mentors and co-motivators in the rehabilitation process, and that they felt well prepared to do that role.
Our working philosophy, or you might say paradigm, has changed from spending the longest time in your own life to spending the longest time in each other's life. This sentence is essential because we live in interconnectedness. At the same time, we identified how the caregiver wanted to collaborate. There are some family members who are not interested in this collaboration and it's okay. And there are those who would like to participate and or contribute with their knowledge, insights, and solutions. One of our tools is using a network card where the individual with stroke places his and her friends and family corresponding to his/her perception. Often we facilitated family members to talk about difficult things. We can't necessarily solve problems, but our aim is to make room for openness so they can talk more openly about subjects. And there are a lot of subjects to talk about: new roles, new habits, new expectations. So by talking open with each other, they may be able to find a solution.
The last significant mechanism with WHEEL is transfer of activity to everyday and social context. One informal caregiver described that his father has resumed a more active lifestyle because after having suffered a stroke, he had been encouraged and had trained with the mentors in his own social context by training with him how to, for instance, walk from his own home to the concert hall. One elderly male stated that meaningful activity were to have a lot of fun stuff, for instance, cooking over fire, that also gives a lot of training as well, he stated.
So, how to transfer activities to everyday and social life? In this project, we always believe that an individual rehabilitation is not complete until new learning is transferred into real, meaningful context. We practice new learning activities in real context. In this way, we ensure that our client felt safe and secure while participating in society. We wanted them to experience self-management. This has led us to visit museums, stamp collection clubs, taking trains, shopping in thrift stores, and driving mini-crosses.
The 6 social psychological mechanisms were described by the participants to be vital in supporting self-management behavior. When mentors focus on these areas, the elder people and the informal caregivers are encouraged to actively reflect on and take initiative and responsibility. Hereby they became participating in action, and this facilitated important interaction processes between the mentors, stroke survivors, and informal caregivers. In regard to interaction process, active reflection, stroke survivors and the informal caregivers experienced that the mentors facilitated new perspectives and enabled them to use these new perspectives to reflect on and find new solutions or simply accept the situation as it was. In regard to the other interaction process, take initiative and responsibility, stroke survivors and the informal caregivers found that this was beneficial as they were encouraged to resume or to discover new meaningful activity. And now Mette will exemplify how the mentors supported these interaction processes.
As we had described before, we practiced a great deal of communication and dialogue using open questions to support the active reflection. Furthermore, stroke survivors used a logbook where their reflections about their rehabilitation experiences could be recorded. We also used logbook to write things down for them to think about or do until our next sessions. Subsequently, we encouraged stroke survivors to use a diary or a calendar where they could take notes about their experiences. Together with the logbook, this supported the initiative and the process of reflection.
The interaction processes were found to generate processes of change and learning. For instance, increased knowledge and understanding of what to expect post-stroke or emotional development as increased self-efficacy. Transformative change was facilitated as the perception of self-identity changed during the rehabilitation process. Identified in quotes of stroke survivors like It's all been about finding back to being myself again. The stroke survivor and former caregiver also experienced to be supported to resume meaningful activity. Although the activity were not resumed to the same level as pre-stroke, this was not crucial to the people, because it was the meaningfulness of the activities that counted. Furthermore, the self-management support intervention seemed to enhance the dyadic interaction between the stroke survivor and former caregivers. And Mette will give some final comments and professional experience in regard to the intervention.
Our professional experience in relation to support self-management in this study is diverse. We have changed our mindset about performing physiotherapy and occupational therapy. It can best be described as a paradigm shift. We have changed our approach, so now we encourage people more actively to choose their way of rehabilitation and their way of continuing their life. We support people so that they realize that there are still many opportunities in a life as a stroke survivor. We focus more than before on all the resources stroke survivors still have and all the things they still can handle themselves. Like everyone else, stroke survivors grow and develop in interaction with others, which is why it's very important that they continue to be part of society and meet regularly with other people. What you can do yourself as a stroke survivor, because you can handle yourself, maybe with a little bit of support. That's what self-management is about. And why self-management is an important intervention and approach in municipality rehabilitation setting.
And now a video of a stroke survivor and his wife will end the presentation from Denmark. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kurs, du skal fortælle lidt om, hvordan du synes, det har været at have en mentor.
Jamen, jeg synes, det har på en eller anden måde givet noget tryghed. Og det har været rart nok for at blive kørt igennem systemet, når man har fået sådan en grim oplevelse. I hvert fald, at min mentor, hende har jeg fået et godt forhold til. Og jeg synes også, at det har været trygt, også for min kone og mig, at når vi har haft hjemmebesøg, at det er med til at støtte alle de problemer, der dukker op, når der er sket sådan en hændelse. Specielt også på et tidspunkt, så da jeg skulle til at afsluttes i hjernecentret i Aarhus, der skulle jeg anmode min egen læge om at få det, der hedder afgiftsfri fysioterapi efterfølgende. Og det aftalte jeg med mentor, at det gjorde jeg bare selv, det skulle jeg nok klare. Og der fik jeg et afslag fra min læge, at det kunne jeg ikke. Og det snakkede jeg med min mentor om, og hun skrev sådan en lille redegørelse direkte til lægen. Og så gik der 2 dage, så fik jeg en mail fra lægen, at det selvfølgelig skulle jeg have det. På en eller anden måde, så man føler, at det bliver taget alvorligt, ikke? Og nøset, det er så meget sagt, men at man har en tæt på, og man har en, man kan spørge om alt muligt, og også i forbindelse med de lammelser, jeg har haft, ikke, eller har, at hvordan det udvikler sig, hvad kan fremtiden blive, og hvordan og hvorledes, ikke? Det giver sådan lidt ro. Hvis man bare gik med det selv, så havde man jo ikke rigtig nogen at spare med. Så det synes jeg, det har været godt, at vi har haft sådan et tæt forhold, som vi har.
Jeg synes, hun har været rigtig god til at spørge ind til, om vi har nogle ting eller et eller andet. Der er samtidig dukket noget op, hvor jeg tænkte, hold da op, hvor er hun god til ligesom at få sat fokus på, hvad det er, ikke også? Altså, og få os til at snakke om det så. Og ellers så ved jeg ikke, at jeg fornemmer ikke, at det har været en mentor, vel? Fordi hun er fysioterapeut også, ikke? Altså, ja. At jeg kan ikke se, hvornår hun er mentor, og hvornår hun ikke er. Men Tove har været rigtig god, synes jeg, til at læse os også på nogle punkter, ikke også? Altså, og give nogle tip til, hvordan vi lige håndterer ting og sager, ikke? Altså, man går lidt i et vadested. Altså, selvfølgelig har vi været påvirket af det begge to. Ikke? Der var noget, vi havde diskuteret, ja. Og hvor jeg ikke rigtig kunne få ham til at lytte. Ja. Og der gik hun ind ligesom og fik ham til at få en anden forståelse af det. Jamen, jeg synes, hun har været god til at støtte mig også, hvis jeg har haft nogle ting, ikke? Også, som jeg ikke lige har helt kunne komme igennem med. Jeg har jo en stedig mand, jo. Så det er jo ikke altid, han hører, hvad jeg siger. Ja.
Jo, at, ja, som du selv siger, at jeg er stedig, ikke? Jo. Så på den måde... Det har altid været. Ja, og så er det godt lige at få andre øjne til at... Ja, netop. Til at se på det.
Ja, det er fint.
Hello, and thank you to the European Life After Stroke Forum for inviting me here to give this talk today as part of this seminar on self-management after stroke. I'm Lisa Kidd from the University of Glasgow, and today I'm going to talk about the importance of fostering meaningful and authentic relationships for supporting self-management, what these offer, and how we can start to build the types of relationships with people that offer them the opportunity to learn about and build their skills and confidence for self-management. I'll pick up on many of the themes that Fiona and Hannah have already highlighted about the role of theory in guiding our practice, what makes supported self-management work well, and how we can sustain and embed this as part of the everyday way in which we work. For those of us working in longer term or life after stroke, in rehabilitation environments or in the field of self-management, we constantly ask ourselves these questions. What can we do to make care more personalised? What can we do to make it more meaningful? How can we build good relationships with people? And how do we build the kinds of relationships with people that offer the right kind of support that will help people to build people's confidence and skills to live well after a stroke? But the real question is how we can start to address these questions and move from a rigid model of care to one that's more consistently kind, personable and compassionate. And what role does theory play in all of this? Now, I'm no sociologist or expert in grand theories, and I don't want to talk about theory in a dry and unrelatable way. But what I want to do is to pick up on what Fiona was talking about earlier in relation to how theory guides our practice, and how through the lens of theory, we can start to understand how supported self-management in stroke works, for whom it works, and importantly, why it works. And the main focus of today's talk is how we can think differently about supporting self-management after stroke through the power and the benefits of meaningful and authentic relationship building. I saw this quote at a talk that I was at last week, and it really struck me and connected so much with what I wanted to talk about today. Theory gives us direction. It helps us to understand what we're doing and why we're doing. And without it, well, we can all feel a little bit at sea. In relation to the evidence base on self-management, we recognise the wealth of evidence that there is to show that self-management works, and it's welcomed by stroke survivors, their families, and by healthcare practitioners. But what we know less about is how it works, what the active ingredients or mechanisms are that make it work, and what makes it work better or stops it from working. If we already know that supported self-management works, then the next step is to understand how it works and how it will work elsewhere. So we need to know more about the context, the mechanisms and the outcomes of supported self-management. And that's how the Impetus project came about, to help identify what makes supported self-management work and to explain why. So how does this connect with theory? Well, we used an approach in the study called realist evaluation, which is a theory-driven approach which acknowledges that interventions or programmes work differently in different circumstances or in different contexts, and allows us to develop and test what's called programme theories, or more simply, ideas or hunches around how we think an intervention or a programme works. And through this, we glean a deeper understanding of how and why things work, in this case, supported self-management in community stroke care. I put the reference to the protocol paper here, which describes the study in a bit more detail, but just briefly, in the first stage of the project, we developed a set of ideas around how supported self-management works, based on the literature and an approach called Q methodology, where we spoke to stroke survivors, community rehabilitation practitioners and managers, and asked them to prioritise what was important in making supported self-management work from their perspectives. Once we had these ideas, we did a little bit of work to refine these and then took them back to the same groups of people to ask them for their thoughts and if they held true with their own experiences. Once we had our final set of ideas, we wanted to share these with policymakers, stroke survivors and clinicians to understand how we could best share these in a wider context, but also how we could use them to make real changes to practice and to the kinds of support that people get after a stroke to help them with their self-management. I'm just going to pause very briefly here to thank my fellow Impetus Project team members and our amazing patient and partnership group who you can see here, and the people who took part in the study, of course, one of whom you'll hear from a little bit later. I'd also like to acknowledge the funding that we received from the project from the Stroke Association. So what makes supported self-management in community care work? We identified two main things that are needed: a positive and supportive culture towards self-management, where everyone has a shared understanding about what this is and values working in a flexible way to provide self-management support for people. And secondly, trusting and supportive relationships which create a space for learning about and building confidence for engaging in self-management. I'm not going to talk about all of these here today, and Fiona has rather brilliantly already alluded to some of the cultural work that we need to do to make supported self-management part of our everyday practice in our organisations. But here I'm going to pick up on some of the aspects from Hannah's talk, focusing in on the importance of relationships and how they work to support people's self-management. When we work in a kind, compassionate and collaborative way with people, we're able to co-create sensible and workable support that reflects best evidence, the context in which the person lives or in which we are delivering care, as well as the person's values and preferences. We can start encouraging and building people's confidence in their skills and assets and the trust that they have in us as health professionals when we use the strategy of meaningful conversations. The importance of relationships and the idea of meaningful conversations may not be a new concept for many of us, and we're all familiar with the time and resource pressures upon us that often make these difficult to consistently do. However, the methodology that we used in the Impetus study really helped us to break this down and provide evidence for how meaningful conversations become the building blocks for developing authentic and genuine relationships with people. Our findings provided evidence that meaningful conversations work in four main ways. Firstly, they offer an opportunity to truly listen to people, to understand them and the context of their lives and what's important to them, which allows us to build a rapport with people where they can feel that their ideas and contributions are important and are valued, and which gives them the confidence to share these. Subsequently, relationships start to feel more authentic and personalised, characterised by a genuine interest in the person as an individual. They also offer an opportunity to discuss expectations for self-management, so that rather than us making an assumption about what people want in their self-management or don't want, we can have that open discussion that helps stroke survivors to have a better understanding of how they can contribute to their self-management and helps them to feel more prepared for what these roles look like. For clinicians, that open discussion of expectations for self-management can allow them to develop a more flexible approach, adopting a hands-off or hands-off coaching role based on what feels right for the person in the situation at that time. Meaningful conversations in the context of building a supportive relationship also offers the opportunity for tailored support, meaning that stroke survivors can decide when they need support and what this looks like in relation to what matters to them and their priorities. This means that it feels more personalised and relevant to them as an individual, and clinicians can feel more confident that they're offering the right support at the right time that's more likely to address people's own needs. Finally, meaningful conversations offer an opportunity for repeated reflection on individualised goals, and this can help clinicians to find out how people are coping and the skills that they are developing along the way. But most importantly, offers an opportunity for stroke survivors to engage in that process of self-discovery and problem solving, working out what works for them and what doesn't, and gaining a sense of mastery in the process of doing and achieving that comes with this. So in terms of outcomes, these building blocks help to offer a sense of shared responsibility for self-management and lay the foundations for building trusting and supportive and collaborative relationships where people feel valued and respected and not just a number. But what happens when there's no or limited opportunities for meaningful conversations, or the context we're working in that make this challenging to prioritise? We were also able to unpack that in our data as well and identified that when we feel reluctant or lacking confidence or support to create the space for a meaningful conversation and a discussion around expectations, we sometimes don't bother trying, and we stick to the usual protocol or checklist-driven care that we're used to doing and feel psychologically safe in doing. And as a result, stroke survivors don't get the chance to feel that their ideas and contributions are valued and can feel just like a number. When the opportunity to discuss expectations isn't created or properly had, then we as practitioners can continue to act paternalistically with people because we remain in control. And as a result, stroke survivors may expect to be led or feel powerless to know how and when they could contribute to their own self-management. When there's no opportunities for tailoring support or this isn't valued, then we continue to deliver care according to our protocols and checklists, and we stick to our silos rather than working with others to achieve that genuine coordination and overlap with other disciplines to provide holistic care. Or we tend to stick to what we can deliver based on the services needs and infrastructure rather than on what the person needs at that time. And when there's limited opportunities for reflecting on or discussing goals and achievements, we fail to properly understand what's happening with the person and we can sometimes make wrong assumptions about their skills or their motivation, which can sometimes lead us to disengage from supporting them in a personalised or tailored way. And failing to provide or encourage opportunities that help stroke survivors to develop their own problem-solving skills and to discover what works and what doesn't work for them. The outcomes of this when meaningful conversations aren't valued and seen as a priority means that we don't manage to build trusting and supportive relationships with people. Our care delivery becomes a transaction almost that has fixed boundaries and does nothing in the longer term to help build confidence and skills to help people feel that they are getting the most meaningful and personalised support available. As a result, we as clinicians continue to lead and drive people's self-management, and stroke survivors can often feel frustrated or powerless to challenge this. To bring this to life, I'd like to introduce you to Morag, who took part in the Impetus study and agreed to share her story with us today about the importance of meaningful and authentic relationships, what these looked like for her when they worked and when they didn't work so well, and how the relationships that she had with people involved in her care helped her to learn about her own self-management skills and build her confidence in self-management and her recovery from her stroke.
Stroke nurse and myself had a good, very friendly relationship, almost like good friends. She was valuable to me and supported me throughout my stroke, my recovery, and after. She still went that extra mile for me. And my occupational therapist was very supportive and a good person to talk to. She got me into the volunteering work. Encouragement to work towards new things and to explore options. Just encouragement to try and move my life forward from this. My occupational nurse, she arranged my volunteering in the PDSA charity, and she came with me to speak to the manager and guide them what jobs they could give me and what I could manage to do. So that was very supportive, getting me back into, if you like, the workplace. I think my stroke nurse told me you originally get 3 months, but she, as I said, she was still attending to me a year later. I felt let down by the physio department at my local health centre. It was too long between sessions, weeks, sometimes 3 weeks between sessions, sometimes 4 weeks. and I felt they didn't understand my type of stroke, so it was difficult for them to gauge the right treatment for me. I felt the physio I wasn't gaining anything from it. It wasn't tailored to my needs. Perhaps it would be more beneficial to treat each patient to the type of stroke they have had, and to be more maybe personalised as opposed to stroke in general. I required the support after the 3 months, not during the first 3 months. That I really felt at times it was just overwhelming. Some days I just wanted peace and quiet, but you had somebody coming in, you know, anything you need to ask, anything. Joe always was there. And that contact, knowing I had that support extended, was very valuable. Didn't remember how to cook, and that was very, very scary for me because I loved cooking. I now volunteer working in a catering kitchen with people with disabilities, as I lost my job due to my stroke. I also volunteer as an IT buddy for granting opportunities to help others. That's good for me and my well-being. As I said, I'm back enjoying myself as a volunteer. I feel like I'm properly working again. I feel like I'm in the workplace, even if it's just a volunteer. So it's brought me on further as well by doing this.
Thank you to Morag for sharing her story there, and I hope that Morag's words and the findings from our work highlight the importance of building and sustaining relationships with people to support their self-management and confidence building in that longer term. When we think about our interactions with stroke survivors, it's our relationships with them that have the power to shape their engagement in self-management. And that brings me back round to the idea of theory again. For a long time, we've conceptualised supporting self-management within the boundaries of personal responsibility and agency, where people have been dichotomised into active or passive self-managers, and where we talk about encouraging people to take more individual responsibility for their self-management. However, I hope that this talk today helps us to rethink some of this and highlights the importance of moving away from individual responsibility to shared responsibility for supported self-management, through the lens of this concept known as relational agency, where a sense of control or confidence comes from the emotional relatedness and the connections that we build together, and the support that this offers in terms of helping people to engage in their self-management. I'd like to highlight this wonderful editorial that was published in Brain Impairment Journal recently and written by Caleb Rickson from Melbourne, who had a subarachnoid hemorrhage at the age of 24. And in it, Caleb calls for us to pause and reflect on the part that we as practitioners play in building connections with people, working with curiosity and creativity to create a psychologically safe space that values and connects and is personalised to people's stories and what's important to them, and how this can build a sense of trust that's enabling for both challenging and encouraging people in the right ways, supporting them to learn about and try out self-management approaches that ultimately help them to learn about what works for them and to build the courage and confidence to live their lives well after a stroke. We need to shift our paradigm here and to rethink our relationships with people, moving away from the idea as these being about creating dependency, but actually about them being the creation of a space for connection, learning and confidence building, where responsibility for self-management can be shared and where autonomy can be supported to flourish, and self-management support can be co-produced together. Thank you to you all for your time and attention today, and I'm looking forward to receiving any questions from you all.
So, thank you to all our speakers for those absolutely excellent presentation. We've had a real whistle tour this morning. We've gone through the evidence base for self-management. We've heard about the impact, and we've heard about the stroke survivor perspective. So I am now going to go back to my lovely speakers, and I'm going to put them on the spot now, and I'm going to ask them some questions. So I'm just going to give them a few minutes to all load up on the screen here. And I'm going to jump straight for Fiona and for Scott, and I'm going to put you on the spot. And the first question I'd like to ask you is it actually really possible to integrate a self-management approach in an acute hospital setting? So I'm going to go to Fiona first and then to Scott.
Thank you, Avril, and hello, everybody. I think we always think of an acute setting, a stroke setting, as being a very structured environment, which is determined by the organisation and the processes of that environment. But actually what we know is that people spend an awful lot of time doing very little as well. So my belief is, yes, it is possible to make changes in an acute environment. And I think my big tip is to do that through the language that we use when we're interacting, both with patients and with families. And as a family member that has had 2 people in my family that's had a stroke, actually being asked, what is it that you can do for that person when you're sitting alongside them is really important. And that's what we put in that big pot of self-management support. It's not an all or nothing. It can be a small thing, a small change that can actually start to foster and build confidence, not just in the person with stroke, but also their family members.
Okay, and Scott?
Yeah, so for me, I was unconscious for about 3 months, and this process actually happened while I was unconscious. So one of my nurses was speaking to my family members when I was unconscious to find out what was it that Scott really likes. What does he, what are his passions? And then when I started to come around and I didn't know where I was, I didn't realize what had gone on. This person had already taken the time to find out what it is that I liked. And for me, prior to my stroke, it was sport, it was rugby, things like that. And they were talking to me about sport, rugby, and we kind of formed a bond, but also we began to have discussions about, what my possible goals could be and things like that around sport and things like that. So this person had already begun sowing the seeds of self-management for me even before I'd come round from kind of being in a coma from my stroke. So yeah, I think it can happen really, really early on.
Okay, thank you both. I'm going to go to Hannah and Messi now. And someone has asked a question about how you would implement your study findings practically. So I suppose, what are your next plans? What are you going to do next? I will just let you fight for pole position. Who goes next?
We are going to do different things. Right now, we are writing on a pamphlet, and after that, we're going to make a short videos film that can be presented at the Knowledge Center on the internet, to be available in that way. And then we are going to present our results at different conferences, the OT conference in May and the National Danish Conference next week. And we are going to have a seminar in October for all the municipality, invite them to a seminar and going through the 6 different ingredients and how we can work with them practically. And hopefully we are going to make a kind of practice network in Denmark in the municipality. That's the first step. And after that, we're going to think about the acute hospital, how to implement the way of doing the self-management more actively than we do right now.
Okay. Letty, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, it's what Hannah says, but it's like we have to go out and spread the words about all the good things there is in self-management, and this will make an influence. I'm quite sure, because you can see the effect when you're working in that way. So I'm sure it's going to be something in Denmark.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a question just to put Scott particularly in the forefront here. So a question specifically for Scott, which I think is a cracking question. Someone has said, first of all, thank you for your very thought-provoking talk. But they're saying that they find your thoughts about risk-taking really important, given the fact that health professionals are often very risk-averse. And would you just like to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I completely understand. So having been a healthcare professional before, I understand the kind of need to manage risk, but also I, as an individual, that's how, for me particularly, I learn through taking risk and pushing the boundaries. So I would much rather take risks in an environment that is with people who can help me manage those risks, but also can it's a safer environment. So ultimately, to be brutally honest, I'm going to take risks whether healthcare professionals are there or not. So I would actually much rather take those risks while I'm with healthcare professionals rather than when I'm off in my own. To be honest with you, I was and still am a bit of a nuisance when it comes to taking risks. So actually, if I can have my healthcare professionals on board with my risk taking and my insight building, then that really helps me, because then they can help me kind of decide whether this is a risk too far. But for me, that's really how I kind of build that insight and understand. But also that's how I really push my boundaries as well.
Okay, so actually I can see Lisa is actually nodding very energetically. Lisa, do you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I absolutely agree with everything that Scott's saying, and from the work that we've been doing with stroke survivors, that's absolutely what they're saying as well. And key to the kinds of relationships that I think we build with stroke survivors and their families as professionals, it has to be relationships that allow people to discover for themselves what's going to work and what's not going to work. And some of that is about positive risk taking. But for us, and that's difficult for us as professionals, because we come from a very risk-averse background, as Scott's saying. We know that that's an issue, but there's something there about supporting people with the psychologically safe space, the confidence to be able to try out things and see what works for them. That's how people learn about their self-management and what's going to work and what's not going to work. People don't learn by us saying, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. It's about exploring that for themselves. So yeah, very much in agreement with what Scott's saying.
Okay, so our audience have gone completely mad at the moment and they're posting loads of questions. So I'm going to actually try and just have some quick fire questions. And if you can try and keep your answers short so we can try and get through some of these. So the next one is, are there any tools or apps that people feel really support self-management? And I'm going to go to Fiona and I'm going to ask Scott about that as well.
I think the short answer is yes, there are plenty of tools. I mean, we have one that we've developed through Bridges, but there are lots of other tools. But I think the key thing to remember about a tool is it's only going to be as good as the content and the way that it's been designed. So the evidence base is very, very poor in terms of information giving alone. So it's also about how somebody interacts with that app. And what we've found with our research is that the critical aspect of that is the stories of real people that illustrate these skills and feel like it's a community within that app. So yes, I'll pass over to Scott because he's the technical brain here.
Yeah, so I think for me, I've tried loads of different tools, And it's really about finding what is it that works with that individual. So you might find a tool that works with one person, but then another person, they're completely turned off by it. So it's not trying to fit everyone into one tool, but actually, you really need to look at the individual and look at how do they work, how do they operate, what has maybe worked for them in the past, and try and find a tool to fit them rather than trying to fit everyone into a particular tool.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question about a need for organizational culture to support self-management, and really how can we build that culture? Lisa, do you want to try and answer that question?
Yeah, I think it's a massive one, Avril, and I did notice a question on the chat that was about how can we support people to work in this way and develop these kind of relationships. And there is so much that we need to think about in culture. And we've been able to unpack some of that in our work, but obviously we've not presented that today. But there's some things there around leadership and champions. So leaders that are compassionate but passionate about driving forward the message of what collaborative supported self-management is, supporting their staff and their teams to find the opportunities to work in that way and to feel that they are supported to work in that way, that they're not going to do something and then come back to their teams and actually their teams and their leaders aren't going to understand what the purpose is that they've been working on. So there's something there about that. Champions that are inspiring and spreading the message of the value of working in this way. There's also something around training and embedding that training in practice, so that it's not just one-off training sessions that we go on and then we come back to our practice and we just do things the same way that we've always done, but actually support that's built into that to enable that training to actually be put into practice and support people to do that. And quite importantly, I think there's something around that practitioner network of support as well. So we build confidence in the way that we work from seeing how others work, but also relating to them as well, and that kind of nudge culture, and knowing who to go to for support as well. So if we're struggling with something or we want to bounce an idea off somebody, to be able to have that network of support of like-minded people so that you're all working in that same way and working towards that shared vision of collaborative self-management.
So thank you very much. We are really against the clock on time here. So what I would say to people in the audience, if you've got a question, please don't live not knowing the answer. I'm sure you could email SAFE or you could email our speakers. Please don't die not knowing the answer to the question that you've posed, but we are simply out of time. So I really want to thank our absolutely fabulous speakers for everything that they've said today and really opening this whole area up and telling us more about the evidence base. And of course, Scott bringing it really alive for us. Can I just please remind you that this is the end of the session 1, but there is a second session this afternoon. So you can join us at 3 o'clock European time or 2 o'clock in the UK. And we really look forward to having you with us again. And thank you so much for joining us and for your participation today. Thank you so much and have a good rest of today.